The Observer.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Observer Book Club event, and also welcome to people watching online. My name is Tim Adams. I'm the editor of the Observer New Review, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome to the stage this evening Margaret Busby.
Thank you, Tim.
Margaret is a pioneering and inspirational figure in British publishing and writing. In 1967, aged just 23, she co-founded the trailblazing publishing house Allison and Busby, championing diverse voices, including Buchi Emecheta, Sam Greenlee and C.L.R. James. And Margaret spent 20 years as editorial director at Allison and Busby, helping to transform the kind of narrow world of London publishing. She's also an acclaimed writer, broadcaster and campaigner. The two books she compiled of women writers of African descent, Daughters of Africa in 1992, and its 2019 follow-up, New Daughters of Africa, are landmark, game-changing anthologies. Zadie Smith described Margaret as a cheerleader, instigator and celebrator of black art and writing for 50 years. Margaret was appointed an OBE in 2006 and a CBE in 2021 for services to literature and publishing, and made president of English Pen in 2023. Her new book, which we're here to celebrate and talk about this evening, is part of the story, and it's a collection of half a century of her writing, essays and book reviews and fragments of memoir. It's a testament to a unique career in British letters, one which shows no signs of stopping. So welcome, Margaret.
Thanks very much, Tim. Thank you.
Margaret and I are going to talk for sort of half an hour or so, and then there'll be a chance for you to ask some questions, so please store them up. It's very much a collective event. I could start. I mean, the book is it's a collection of all of your writing, but it sort of builds a picture of you throughout your career. It feels like a memoir in a way. I mean, in your book, you mentioned that you had the idea for Allison and Busby back in 1965, I think in the same month that Malcolm X was assassinated. What was the sort of primary motivation looking back to that point?
Well, it actually was conceived at a party. I was in my last term, my last year at university, at London University, and a friend of mine, who I'd known since school, was having her first novel published, and so was having a party. And she was also about to get married, so it was also a party to celebrate that. And the party took place in her cousin's garden. Her cousins were the Youngs, Louisa Young, a writer. And so I was invited as a friend of hers. Her fiancé invited friends of his. He was at university as well in Oxford. And this guy, he was a friend of his. I was introduced to because we were both doing things at our college, university literary scene. I was involved in my college literary magazine, and we were introduced. And we said, "What are you going to do when you graduate?" I thought I might go into publishing. Let's start a publishing company. So that's how it was conceived.
And I think that the garden of the house where you were in was you mentioned was where J.M. Barrie wrote Peter Pan.
Exactly.
So it was perfectly, a magical setting in every sense.
Yep.
And so you mentioned you applied for other sort of conventional publishers at that point. What had happened then?
Well, obviously we didn't have any money, so it was a while before we could find our feet and get started. So we both were applying for jobs, and Clive, I think he worked for Macmillan and Panther, and I got a job at the Crescent Press. But I tried to get jobs. I remember applying for jobs from ads I saw in the bookseller. And I remember one job I went to, I applied by post, and I got a reply by post, I got an interview by post. I turned up at the office, and at the reception they picked up the phone and said, "There's a black girl down here who says she got an interview." So that was the climate. And then we began working evenings and weekends on Allison and Busby. And the name came about quite by chance, because we had to find a name. And we had 3 paperback poetry books we wanted to publish. And we didn't have a name. We kept thinking up names. We thought, well, there are 2 of us, Gemini, Clive's birthday was in June. We'd sent it off to the Board of Trade. No, you can't have that. Somebody else has got it in your sector. So we ended up thinking, well, they can't object to our own names. And so at least Allison and Busby is A and B, and it's not, Q and W or something that doesn't trip off the tongue. So that's how we started. And that initiative, it led to the first 3 books we published, were 3 paperback poetry books, because it was the era of the beat poets, and we were both interested in poetry, and we wanted to publish poetry in cheap editions that we could afford, rather than, or young people like us, rather than expensive hardback editions. So we thought, how many copies do you print? And they were all set on an electric typewriter, and we thought, well, all these millions of people in the country, we can, 5,000 copies each, so we had 15,000 paperback poetry books.
Wow, okay.
And no distribution.
Okay.
So that's how much we knew about
heady days, exactly. And at that point, you first came to this country when you were 6, really, to boarding school. Is that's
well,
right?
Yeah,
and you grew up in Ghana, and then you came across. Going back that previous, what was it? What was your? How was that? I mean, you arrived in Bexhill-on-Sea.
Well, the first school I went to was in Westmoreland.
Okay. Oh, okay.
And then that school, I think it closed down because there weren't enough pupils. There were more teachers than pupils. So then my sister and I went to school in Bexhill-on-Sea, Sussex. And I met the headmistress quite late, long after I'd left school, and she was about 100. And she explained to us, my sister and me, why they let us be taken into that school. Because my sister, who died 5 years ago, her name was Eileen Busby, and I was Margaret Busby. And the headmistress was called Eileen McGarry, and the deputy was called Margaret Steinitz. So she said, we've got to take them, they're Eileen and Margaret. Because it hadn't been easy. I remember my mother told me once that she'd been trying to get a school to take us, and they said, well, we'd like to take them, but it's the parents of the other girls who might not like it. So we went to the
and they were prepared to sort of say that out loud. And
that was how it was in those days. But the school we went to in Sussex was an international school, so that was full of people. Right. Well, we were the first black children, little black girls. But I had friends from Liberia, Trinidad,
Right, so it was
Persia, as we called it then, and all over. So it was an international upbringing in terms of schooling.
But none of those kinds of voices were being represented really in British publishing at all by the time you got... I mean, this is 15 years later, but still, I mean, if you look at what people were publishing then, it wasn't any of that. Did you... I mean, obviously part of the impetus for setting up the publishing house was to make sure those voices were starting to be heard.
Well, it was, I suppose so. It wasn't in a conscious way. I mean, I'll tell you, one of the things that made me feel I could be involved in the literary world in Britain was when I was at school, I would get literary magazines. One was called John of London's Weekly. And in 1961, I got an edition, one of these issue of this magazine, and on the cover was a photograph of a South African woman called Noni Jabavu. And she was, I think she was the first African woman to be involved in, I think she edited the New Strand Literary magazine. So she showed me it was possible to be an African woman and be involved in the British literary scene. Mm. So that was, I always give credit to Noni Jabavu. But in my whole school curriculum and my university curriculum, after I left school, I left quite early, actually. I did my O-levels when I was 14, and I left school when I was 15. And then I went back to Ghana. Then I came back and got a place at London University, and I read English. But in my whole schooling, my whole educational curriculum, I never read a book by a black writer. And I found books on my own. I was always down Charing Cross Road in the second-hand bookshops looking for books I could find, mostly American books. And so it was that feeling of not being represented that was another impetus. Of course, I found quite a lot of the educational publishers published books whether it was Heinemann or Macmillan or Nelson. There were books published for the colonial market, if you like. So there were not books that went into the trade bookshops in London.
But nothing in the sort of canon of...
No, it was a... I read about... I read Shakespeare, Chaucer, Milton, Molière, and all that.
Yeah.
Those are all the things that we were being taught in terms of English literature. And at university, I did a special course in American literature. And there, it was any bit that came into the 20th century. And I read...
So there would be Ralph Ellison or...
Well, that was the only place where I found any black characters, actually.
Right.
It was in Faulkner.
Okay.
So it was a very different sort of literary scene that I had to navigate.
And you had some... I mean, your father was great friends with C.L.R. James.
My father was at school with C.L.R., yes. Yeah.
And, I mean, was that a shaping kind of influence on you, knowing him and knowing what he'd achieved? Or?
Well, what happened when I published C.L.R., in the 70s, most of C.L.R. James's books were out of print. So Allison and Busby brought him back into print. We did 3 volumes of selected writings, and then we published books that hadn't been published before, like Nkrumah and the Garden of Evolution. We reprinted books, The Black Jacobins, which is his famous book, wasn't available in this country, so we brought that into print. So it was a question of not only publishing new writers, but also bringing back into print writers who'd been let go, who'd gone out of print. So there were not only black writers, not only African or West Indian writers or Caribbean writers, but writers from anywhere. We published Michelangelo's sonnets, actually. We published Japanese samurai.
Yeah, sure.
And
Michael Moorcock. You
published Michael Moorcock. Yeah. He was, the first novel the first full-time book we did, because we, as I said, we started going publishing as a weekend and evenings venture, and we both had full-time jobs, and then we left our jobs in 1968, or 69 actually, when we came across a novel that had been written by an African-American who had met a friend of my then... No, we weren't actually married. I wasn't married. I was never married to Clive. Let me clarify that, because people always assume that Allison and Busby were a sort of personal life. No, we weren't. We had no personal connection. I was married to a jazz musician, and a friend of my husband's, or he wasn't yet my husband, but he had been in university with him, and he met in Mykonos an African-American called Sam Greenlee, who'd been trying to get his first novel published on both sides of the Atlantic, and nobody wanted it. And so Alexis sent him to us in London and said, I know somebody who started a publishing company. I read the book, I worked on the manuscript with Sam, and then we decided we wanted to get it serialized. And we thought, this is going to be our first full-time book. And we said, we want to... It's a political thriller. I won't give the plot away, because I hope everybody will rush out and buy it. It's called The Spooku Sab Amador. It was people call it a diversity parable, because it's still applicable now. And we thought, it's a political thriller, it's really powerful. We ought to get it serialized nationally, or get it into national newspapers. So we sent it to The Observer.
Of course, where else?
The manuscript. Actually, I was trying to think, who was the editor of the magazine? I think it was John Thompson.
Okay, slightly, probably before my time.
Before you were born, yeah.
I don't know, I didn't go that far, but yeah, it's pretty hard. And they ran it in the magazine?
It was extracted, it's in my bag in the green room. I should have brought it. I've got a copy of the photocopy of the cover of the issue. So it was in the Observer colour magazine in March 1969.
And then it became a film, that book, didn't it?
We sold translation rights in Japanese, Dutch, Italian. It became a film of the same title with a score by Herbie Hancock. The film kind of disappeared because I think the FBI thought it was a bit dangerous. Okay. And it's still around, it's still rated. It's in fact, I was in Johannesburg last year to get a an honorary doctorate. It was very nice of them. And there's a professor there who made a lovely oration, I suppose it was to me, and she kind of connected the publication of Spook and the film, The Spook Who Sat by the Door, with Sinners.
Okay.
So, sort of saying that if that hadn't happened, Sinners wouldn't have happened.
Right, wow, okay. Right.
So it's all my fault, really.
And at that point, I mean, there was, as you say, there were certainly black women writers who were being published in America at that point,
yes.
but not so much. I mean, there was sort of Maya Angelou and Toni Morrison was just starting to publish. Yeah.
That's right.
But
yeah.
not so much here. And you mentioned the book you tried to publish Maya Angelou here and it didn't happen.
Well, I mean, I don't know, why did I ever say that? Because people latch
did
onto
you say
that.
that? I don't
No,
know.
I mean, there were lots of things that we published before. We did publish black American writers. We published a woman called Rosa Gee,
Yeah.
whose granddaughter is now a friend of mine who discovered she was her grandmother. We published a writer called an African writer, Buchi Emecheta, who was writing novels about her life, about Nigerian society, about women in Nigerian society. And I was her editor for about 10 years. We worked closely together. And it was just trying to help her perspective on how she navigated her life reach a wider audience. And so we were publishing books that we wanted people to read, books that we thought people might not read if we weren't publishing them. We were just publishing what we felt like.
And did you feel, I mean, were you finding an audience for the books? I mean, publishing's always a struggle in some respects, but...
We found audiences, we found an audience, and I mean, I'm not saying we made lots of money, because we didn't, and partly because we didn't always know that we had been given a bad deal. I remember we sold paperback rights to America, and we were offered a royalty of something like 4%. We didn't know we were being ripped off. Right. So we were learning as we went along. But we published books that we believed in, books that we thought were wonderful books, even if they weren't going to make money. And our books won prizes, whether it was the Guardian Fiction Prize. We won that 2 years running, once with a Guyanese writer called Roy Heath, once with Michael Moorcock. And we sometimes thought, well, we ought to publish things that we know are going to make money to subsidise the things that we're not sure are going to make money. But we were still being quite eccentric and maverick. So somebody said, well, books about animals always sell. Do a book about animals. Okay. So we somehow...
Any animal?
Well, we did a book about rats.
Okay.
Which we bought from... It was written by a Dutch novelist, and we got a subsidy to the translation. We published a book on rats by Martin Hart. Okay. And sometimes we decided we were going to do a book on astrology. We thought nobody will notice, we'll just make money and subsidise. It did well. We did a book called Love, Sex and Astrology. It did so well we had to do business success and astrology and the astrologer's diet book. And so, these were things that were being successful, even if they weren't winning literary prizes.
And then you were using them to kind of subsidise them.
Well, they were also, they were fun to do. In fact, the best compliment somebody ever paid me was to say, well, you never knew what Allison and Busby was going to publish next, but you knew it was going to be interesting. Yeah. Well, so we published a lot of different books. And we found authors in various ways. I mean, as I said, Sam bumped into a friend on the island of Mykonos, and we published a spook. We found another writer in the George, in the pub down Water Street.
Always a good place to find writers.
So, we were quite open to what we took on. We weren't being confined by what we thought we should publish or what the industry thought should be published. So it was.
And you mentioned the opening piece in this book is an essay that you wrote for the New Statesman when you were before you started.
Before I started.
Which is actually a very funny piece about how liberal white people were tying themselves in knots to kind of
trying to be nice
to be nice to
black people.
But at that point, you were offered a column, I think you say, at the New Statesman, or you talked about that. And so you could have become a writer. Was there a sort of I mean, it was slightly
Well,
an either-or thing at that point. Were you
I wasn't
frustrated?
seeing it as that. Well, I mean, I don't think it's ever too late. I'm a writer now, aren't I?
Yeah.
I'm being I used to be an editor, now I'm being edited. No, I have this theory that you should never say, I'll just have this one career. What's your next career going to be?
I don't know. I mean, it's probably a postman, possibly.
Yeah, you could try that. Yeah. No, I think you do what you want when you want, and it doesn't rule out doing. I mean, I did other things as well. I was also doing painting. I was a painter. I was working for the BBC African Service. I had a radio programme. This is all to subsidise our publishing habit, but it was. To me,
what kind of paintings were you doing?
Just pen and ink scribble.
Okay.
In fact, we were at the Africa Centre for my book launch last week, and I was in an exhibition at the Africa Centre when he was at Covent Garden. So it was just things that I wanted to do.
But there was this. I mean, it was. You became sort of friends with Toni Morrison, or you collaborated with her on certain
Toni,
things.
when I started, she was the only other black woman editor I knew of.
Yeah.
She was being an editor at Random House in the States, and I used to go to the Frank Book Fair with my partner Claire Allison, and I knew all the black people working in publishing on both sides of the Atlantic. And Toni, I knew as a wonderful writer as well. I mean, she began writing her novels in, I think, 1970, when she was already... So she was both a publisher and a writer. And Beloved, her book that everybody rates, I suppose, as her masterpiece, was published in 1987 in the States. And she was over here for the British publication in 1988, I think. And there was a programme that was going to have Toni and me on talking probably about publishing or editing. I think it was a women's programme. But at the last minute, they decided they couldn't do the item. They dropped it. And why? Somebody who worked there told me it was because they thought Toni wasn't well enough known.
Oh, right. Big mistake.
And so we decided, okay, well, there was a friend of mine called Sindamli Bridgelaw who had just done a film course. We said, we'll make our own film. In fact, Sindamli wrote a piece about it for The Observer.
Okay.
Called Tea with Toni Morrison, I think. And so Toni had an hour free in her publicity schedule, and I didn't have time to reread the books. And we made our own film. I interviewed Toni, and then that was probably in about early 1988. Then she went on and won the Pulitzer Prize, and we sold our film back to Channel 4, and then she went on from there. But it didn't end. It wasn't that she immediately became, part of the literary establishment, because in 1993, or in 1992, Derek Walcott won the Nobel Prize. And up until then, he had just been a black writer, and so he was not part of the literati, if you like. And I had met him, I knew him, I'd interviewed him on the radio, and so my phone was going, can you quickly write something about Derek Walcott by 4:30? The next year, Toni Morrison won it, and exactly the same thing happened. People had not read her, they didn't even know Toni was a woman.
Right.
And I was writing about Toni, and from winning the Nobel Prize on, she then became a name to reckon with. But that's how little attention was given sometimes to black writers.
And I guess that was one, that sense of that little attention, and particularly, I think somebody, I'm not sure it's you, there's an interesting quote in the book where somebody says that although kind of identity politics was becoming a bigger thing, women's studies courses ignored black women mainly, and black studies were concentrating on black men.
Yeah.
So there was this sort of
Well, there was a
gap.
book suddenly published in America called All the Women Are White, All the Blacks Are Men, but some of us are brave.
And I guess that was one of the impetus for creating your anthology to start with. I mean, to fill that gap, to remind us that those voices were there. And
I wasn't thinking about it in those terms when I started. I wasn't even thinking about... I didn't get up in the morning and think, oh, God, there's another black woman again looking at me. No, I was doing what I wanted to do, but I was seen as that. So I was... if you like, being put in the silo as a black woman. And one of the things that I always have to point out about the things I wrote are the things I was asked to write, the things I was asked to review.
And that was a kind of form of stereotyping in itself.
Well, yeah, I guess so, because it seemed to be thought that I was only interested in black writers. I was interested in black writers, and I loved reviewing black books. But I could have reviewed more books by white writers or writers from anywhere. I could have reviewed books on music or maybe not cookery, but, but you know what I mean. So my expertise was seen to be in being black, and that was the way society was, or literary industry was at a certain point. And
so you left Allison and Busby after 20 years when they were taken over. I can't remember who took them over now, but
it was taken over by W.H. Allen.
W.H. Allen, and your Clive stayed on and you left. Why was that? What was the?
I don't know. I think it was because they thought he was my boss.
Okay.
Or I was sleeping with him, perhaps they thought. No, so after that, then I became, that was in 1987, then I became editorial director of a company called Earthscan. And after that, I stayed there a couple of years. Then I went freelance, and I've been freelancing ever since the early 90s. In fact, one of the reasons I always give, I got a bit fed up with what I call the male oddity, where you're working in collaboration on equal terms, supposedly with a man, and suddenly he knows something he hasn't passed on to you, and you say, why didn't you pass on? Why don't you let me know that? Because somebody's told him something, and he says, oh dear, didn't I tell you?
All right. The catch-all phrase.
And that quite often happened in terms of somebody wanted to get in touch with somebody running the company, and they would get in touch with Clive. He wasn't in because he was down the George, but they wouldn't think to phone me on. So it was that the way society thought, well, you've got a black woman and a white man, who's in charge? And of course it wasn't me.
And so, I mean, obviously, do you have I mean, you've obviously worked in the industry subsequently to that. Has that improved, would you say?
I would hope so, but how can I tell? I'm not on the inside anymore. But I still find it, I still think there's whatever changes have been made for the better, I'm sure there are many more ways that the industry can be improved. I mean, there was a time when I could name, well, maybe I still can, every person of colour working in the publishing industry in this country. And we all became friends. I remember, for example, I went to a party at Penguin, a publication party, and I was used to going to parties where I was only black presence, apart from whoever was passing the canapes or hanging up the coats or whatever. And I saw across from another black woman, and we became friends. She actually was working at Penguin. Her name was Ella Wakatama, and we're still friends. But that's how rare it was. I mean, I ended up doing work for her at Penguin, and it went on. And she's still a friend, and we still are in touch with her. And there's another woman, Verna Wilkins, and she started a publishing company called Tamarind Books in about 1987. She was trying to show young children that they could be represented in children's books. And who else? Bibi Bakari Yusuf, Kasara Republic Press, Ella Dillsworth was at Virago, is now an agent. So, we all knew each other, and we could all support each other in different ways. In fact, we all got together in various initiatives. One was called Independent Black Publishing. Another was called GAP, which stood for Greater Access to Publishing, trying to campaign for more, particularly black women, to be involved in the industry. So we were supporting each other, we were helping each other. We were also quite aware of the fact that apart from the mainstream industry, there were independent, autonomous black companies. I mean, the first black publishing company in this country was New Beacon Books, which started in 1966. That was the first black-led, if you like, publishing company. Then Allison Busby came in 1967. Then in 1969, Bogle Literature, which was Jessica Huntley and Eric Huntley. So we were, and in fact, there was something called the International Book Fair of Radical Black and Third World Books, which ran from 1982 to 1995. And that was a wonderful annual event that brought in people from every continent. And it also had a week of a cultural week. So you had exhibitions, concerts, and other cultural events associated with just the book fair and the stall. So, but it was just an amazing way of bringing people together and showing what there was that was being produced that didn't necessarily find its way into W.H. Smith's or whatever the high street bookshops.
And I guess by the time you published your second anthology, some of that had changed in terms of the writers, at least. I mean, you had Zadie Smith and
well, the first anthology
and
I published in 1992, as you said, and that was because you'd have thought that there were just a handful of black women writers, and they were all American. And I wanted to say, well, yes, they're there. We love Toni Morrison and Maya Angelou and Alice Walker and Terry McMillan, but what about the women in the rest of the world over generations? So the subtitle of the first anthology was Words and Writings from Ancient Egypt to the Present. And that was in 1992.
Who was the ancient Egyptian?
There was one, Hatshepsut.
Okay.
Do you know her?
No.
And there was a lot of also orature, I mean, oral traditional literature, obviously written by women. You could tell from what the words said. And a lot of the people in that anthology were not necessarily yet well known, although they became better known as years went by. But in 2019, when New Daughters of Africa came out, it wasn't that it was only dealing with a younger generation, because this again had a historical perspective.
Sure.
It started with a Nigerian feminist. It was arranged by decade of birth. So the eldest person in it was a Nigerian feminist born in the 1790s.
Right.
And it went on to people born in the 1990s. Again, just to show that there is this range, this intergenerational span of creativity that black women have been contributing to for generations.
Yeah, we ran a story recently about Phyllis Wheatley, the extraordinary. Is that her name? That's the name.
Phyllis Wheatley.
Yeah, the romantic.
Yeah.
Who was an amazing romantic poet.
Yeah.
I'd never.
We're going back to the 18th century then. Yes, exactly. And in fact, she had her first book published in London.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people didn't believe she was
a real thing.
The real author of her book. Anyway.
So alongside, I was listening to your Desert Island Discs, which I'd missed when it first came out. So alongside, you also kind of, obviously your interests ranged kind of far and wide, and you were obviously very interested in music as well. Yeah. And you let slip on that you were friends with Stevie Wonder and Nina Simone.
I think you exaggerate. I mean, I've met these. I've hung out with them here. And
okay, well that counts. You know.
Yeah, but I mean, Stevie is he's a genius of a musician anyway. But I mean, I've been to a few gigs with Stevie, and
and you met him back in the 70s, or how did that
well, back in the 70s, as I said, I was doing work for the radio work for the BBC, and so was my sister Eileen. In fact, I think it was my sister Eileen who first met Stevie because she was doing interviews, and then he became like a family friend. In fact, I remember going to some concert he was doing in Wembley. This was before my mother died, so it must have been in the 80s. And at one point, my she lost her sight towards the end of her life, and I remember at one point Stevie was about to sing I Just Called to Say I Love You, and he said, "Mrs. Busby, this is for you." Oh. And I remember everybody in the audience thinking, "Mrs. Busby?"
Oh, that's lovely.
So yeah, I've had a lot of luck in meeting
Yeah.
talented, particularly musicians, but also writers. And
What you mentioned your mother. Struggled to get you into school here and so on. She must have been very proud and gratified by how things turned out for you. Were you?
my mum.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think both my parents were, and my family still were. I mean, I get messages from my cousins around the world and my nieces in the States just in the last couple of days since they've heard about the book being published, just saying nice things, be proud of you and things. Well, I'm proud of them too.
And did she, I mean, they'd had a history in Britain as well, hadn't they? They both lived here before you
My
came.
parents?
Yeah.
Well, my father, he was actually born in Barbados, and when he was 6 weeks old, his father was a tailor, and they moved to Trinidad. And he went to a school there called Queen's Royal College. And his father took him in to see the school and said, if you want to go there, you've got to be bright and win scholarships and exhibitions. So my father did that. In fact, my father was at school with C.L.R. James, and so they were school friends and they were lifelong friends. And they were, he was like C.L.R., like a family friend. But my father won something called the Island Scholarship, which meant that you could have a further education in Britain. So my father studied medicine in Dublin. He became a doctor. He practiced in Walthamstow. And then he went to Ghana in 1929. Right. But the way he met my mother was because my mother's father, who had been born in Dominica and had somehow found his way to save money and travel to study law in Britain in 1899.
Wow, okay.
And he was a delegate at the first Pan-African Conference in London in 1900. And in 1902, he went to Ghana, or the Gold Coast. So he was seen as the senior member of those Caribbeans, West Indians, if you like, they were called in those days, who went to the Gold Coast in the first half of the 20th century. And he had a house in a place called Secondie, which is where my mother's mother was from. And his house was called Dominica House. Mm. And so all these West Indians would gather at Dominica House for holidays or New Year or whatever. So when my dad went in 1929, he went there and gathered there and he met my mum. Mm. And so here I am.
And do you still feel a strong connection to Ghana, or is this very much home?
Yeah, I was in Ghana my brother is still living in Ghana, and I was there just in February. And I have lots of cousins there, but I have family in Trinidad, I have family in Dominica, I have family in the States, I have family in the UK. I claim the world. Mm.
And I mean, for a long time in your career, it felt like we were making progress on some of these issues, obviously. Since whatever, it's easy to date it from 2016 really, but there's been a hardening of attitudes, obviously, towards multiculturalism and integration.
So I'm not sure what is going on. Do you know?
I mean, certain people are sort of using it for leverage, aren't they, really? Political leverage. But have you, I mean, it must be obviously saddening for all of us, but you must have felt that particularly keenly, in a way, having been so close to the progress that was being made.
It is extraordinary that there are various initiatives, I mean, particularly to do with, I don't know whether it's education or cultural things, where there seems to be a pushback against having a broader look at the world. I mean, I don't like all those terms that talk about ethnic minority and things like that, because we're not a minority, we're global majority. And I don't think we have to feel we're in the margins just because we are people of colour. I think, I'm central, I'm not in anybody's margin, I'm in my centre. You're in your centre. Mm-hmm. So I think we're all part of the story. Mm-hmm. Title of the book. We're all part of something that we should be working to make work, to make the world a better place. That's what it is. We're not saying that this is better than that, or this should have more privilege than that, or this person, or this category of people. I think we're all trying to do something to enrich the world and to show some sort of humanity to each other. And I don't understand how people sleep at night who do the opposite.
I agree. That's probably a good moment to open up to the to our lovely audience here.
I can't see
anyone. But I don't know. Have we got a microphone, or does anyone want to ask some questions of Margaret?
I wanted to just make an intervention in your last exchange. I'm not sure, as Margaret wasn't quite sure about what these conversations that leverage multiculturalism over a cliff have been about, or where they're experienced. But I would say that the UK government estimates that among UK school children, 38% are non-white British. And that rises to 67% in London. So whoever wants to leverage our multiculturalism is first of all going to lose. But second of all, welcome, let's see who you are. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. Anyone else to pick on that?
Thank you very much, Margaret. Very interesting talk there. I just wanted to find out a bit more about the key inspirations for the current book. If you could tell us a little bit about that, please.
A bit more about
Your current book.
the title.
The title and the sort of things that you've covered and the inspirations behind that.
Well, I think the title covers many fronts. As I was saying earlier, we are all part of the story. I don't think that your part or my part, we can't take a part out of it. We're all part of it. And also, we all need to feel part of it. But the other reason for it is to say the book doesn't represent the whole of my story, obviously. And as I was saying earlier, some of the things I wrote about were things that I was asked to write about. So it's not only the things that I could have written about. So it's a bigger story that we're all part of. Am I talking rubbish?
Not at all. I mean, also to me, the story's still going on, obviously.
It's still going on, yes. Yeah. And a good story you want to keep hearing again and again.
Yeah. And you're still
I'm
busy,
still ducking and
very
diving.
busy.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are you working on?
I'm being interviewed by various people.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Over here on the side.
Thank you so much, Margaret. I wanted to ask you, if you were publishing today, on the editorial side as opposed to the writing side, are there any particular things that you think you would be looking for and actively seeking out?
If I was publishing, what would I? No, I come to writing with an open mind, and it's a bit like I've judged a lot of prizes, and I don't go into judging a prize knowing what I'm going to be looking for or what I'm going to find. I'm going to find something that might grab me for one reason or another, might enlighten me, it might excite me, and that's what I did when I was a publisher, and that's what I would still want to do. As I said, I quoted that thing, somebody saying, you never knew what Allison Busby was going to do next. So I can't tell you what I would have done next. And I think rather than try and put writers or works of literature into a box, we have to try and think, how can we make this good book, whatever it is, available to as many people as possible, even if it's not something we can do in a conventional way.
You say you judge the Booker Prize, I think during lockdown, is that right?
That was during lockdown.
Perfect kind of lockdown job,
yeah.
wasn't it?
A lot of PDFs. A lot of PDFs to read.
And you had to read 160. It must be I've never done it, but it must be very interesting to have a snapshot of what people are reading, that volume of fiction, and just it's almost like having a little snapshot of the nation's kind of subconscious or something.
The thing is, I love judging prizes, but I love long lists and I love short lists, and I just love anything that spreads the word. And I always think that every book that is published has been championed by some editor or some publisher. So there are some people who think this is a brilliant book that should win every prize. So it's not a scientific process when you're judging a prize. You're not going to say this book wins because it exactly weighs this amount. It weighs this, this is the weight it is, and this is the weight a winning book should be. Or it's a question of who you're interacting with, what they're saying to convince you, and vice versa, what the consensus is. And you want to say, read as many books as possible. Don't just read one book. Don't just read the winner. Read the long list. Read the short list. So it's about encouraging people to read. And I think that's what I found about publishing that I liked. You're trying to share something that you feel enthusiastic about with the rest of the world, or as many people as you can find in the world. So it's about, you're not saying, this is a great book, I'm not going to tell you about it.
Keep it to myself.
Yeah. You want to say, I'm going to tell everybody about it. And how can I do that?
Yeah. I'm thinking you might be a scary person to have in a book group. Are you in a book group?
No, I'm not in any book groups. Well, I mean, maybe prize juries are sort of book groups.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
And you chose Shuggie Bain was Douglas Stewart's
that was the
book,
one
wasn't
that
it?
in the year we were. But actually, what I think is also, going back to prizes, it's not simply a matter of what the books that are chosen and what they represent in terms of diversity, as everybody goes on about. But it's also who's doing the judging. If the judges are all from the same sort of background, the same age, then you're likely to get, time after time, similar results. Whereas if you have judges who represent different demographics, age groups, skills. I mean, the year I judged the book, we had, somebody who was a reviewer, a writer, a publisher. So that was how diverse it was. Okay, you did have a black woman and a black man and a white woman, but that's not what makes it for diversity. It's different ways of looking at different things, and we're all contributing to an overall view of what makes good literature. And it's not that your view trumps mine. Sorry, not that word, I won't use that word.
yeah, that's out of bounds now.
No, it's not, I'm not saying that because you went to Oxbridge, so obviously you know more than I do. Did you go to Oxbridge?
I did actually, but I'm not sure that qualifies me for anything.
But you know what I mean. So, I mean, your view is as valid as mine or hers or whoever's.
Yeah. More questions? What's somebody at the back there?
Thank you. Hi, Margaret. I'll stand. Hello.
Hi.
I was just wondering whether, because your work is books and reading and so on, judging and editing, I wonder if you ever read purely for enjoyment. Can you switch it off? The judging, weighing part of reading. And I know from your last Desert Island Discs, you chose Aimé Césaire's book. Now I know you're choosing another set of Desert Island Discs, and I'm wondering which is your next favorite book to take to the island?
Which is my next favourite book to take to the island? I've got lots of favourite. I just like to be maverick. So there's a book I recommend to people because it's inspirational to me. It's a sort of reference book. It's called Tolstoy's Bicycle. This is because apparently Tolstoy learnt to ride the bicycle in his late 60s. So this is a book you can see what people did at later stages in their life. So you can be inspired. So that might, I might become a airline pilot or something. But no, I don't like having to rank my favourite books, actually, because there's always just some sentimental value to actual copies or when you read this or what. But no, I would be happy with any book.
Do you return? Are there books you return to sort of year after year? Or are you books behind?
Well, I would if I had time, but if I wasn't judging prizes or reviewing books or whatever. No, I mean, I'm always reading something, but I quite like essays a lot. I like reading, I like anthologies. I like collections of things, partly because you can find time to read something shorter than, War and Peace.
Mm-hmm. And you've obviously, I mean, there's loads of different kinds of writing in this. Were you ever moved to write fiction, poetry, and so on?
Well, if I was, what do I write? I write song lyrics.
Okay.
I have written song lyrics. No, I used to write poetry. I've written different kinds. I take up any challenge. I've written plays. I like challenges.
2 more questions here.
You can hear me. I wanted to ask, in terms of way back when you started, you talked about books that nobody else necessarily wanted to publish. How did you know that they were going to be a success?
I don't think we did know. We just believed that we would do our best and try and persuade people. And I always say to people who ask about, that people say, I can't start a publishing company, I haven't got enough money. Well, I say, well, we didn't have any money, but we had lots of energy. So you just put a lot of energy into it, and you work hard, and you take people out to a drink who work on newspapers, and you try and persuade them to review your books or whatever.
Never worked.
You try. No, so there's no easy answer. You don't know what's going to happen, but you believe in something, and therefore you work at it, and you give it all your energy, and you try and persuade people, and you don't take no for an answer, and as we didn't with the Observer. And sometimes things work, sometimes things don't work, but it doesn't stop you. You try something else. I remember another thing we tried when we thought we'd try and we'd do books that might make money, even if they weren't sort of literary masterpieces. We published books on waterproof paper. We published a book called Songs to Sing in the Bath.
Did that work?
I've got a copy somewhere still.
Very good.
So we were just doing things in a way that was trying to make people focus on books, on literature, on the power of words, and sometimes there were things that made money. Sometimes things won prizes and didn't make money. Sometimes things made money and didn't win prizes. I can't hear.
I want to say thank you, Margaret. I know you said this book's writings from half a century. So what was that process of going back and looking at some of your old writings? Does it spark new feelings? Do you feel differently? And what was that process of putting it together in the book? Was it like a process of elimination?
I find it's quite hard to reread stuff you've written, isn't it? Going back over decades. Do you find it easy?
No, not really. No.
And sometimes
you don't actually recognise. Do you have that experience? Where you thought, I don't remember writing this, but
exactly.
Yeah,
I hope I haven't plagiarised anybody, because sometimes you do read that. Did I really write that? Oh, yeah. I did. But there was. It was a question of, first of all, how do you arrange it? It's arranged chronologically. So it starts with something the earliest thing I wrote in a national newspaper that I have a copy of, or I still could have access to. There are lots of things that could have been in it. I could do another volume, because there are things I didn't find, things where the publications have gone out of print. I didn't spend hours in the British Library looking for things. It's just part of the story. So it was. There are themes. There's repetition because I'm trying to make a point. I always try to make a point about the history of black publishing. I mean, you talked about Phyllis Wheatley, talking about it's trying to give people a historical view of literature in much of what I write, because otherwise you get pigeonholed, you get confined to the margins, you get minimalized. And I want to say, this is some of what I've written about. And I've written about these things partly because I was asked to, but also I want to reference a lot of things that have been important before I started writing, before, and will continue long after I'm around. And there are people who I've written about who don't feature in this volume, or maybe I'll feature them in another volume. There are people who have inspired me I've written about, have included in this volume. So there are quite a few essays, tributes, obituaries, of course. Obituaries are sort of history, so sometimes you get a historical view of something through somebody's life, and so that's been quite illuminating, looking back at those things that I wrote. A lot of them some for the Observer. Have I written for the Observer? Yes, I have. Yeah. So for different sorts of papers, for national papers, for small papers, for magazines, for black journals, some are addresses, some are. It's a range of things. In a way, there's something in every piece that is sort of autobiographical or biographical. So
it's as I was saying, it sort of builds up to be
it's
like
all
a
part
memoir.
of a story. And
We've got time for one more question, I think. You. Oh, okay, sorry, here. Sorry, can't.
Thank you, Miss Margaret. My name's Temi. I just wanted to ask similarly to some other questions. If you were still in publishing, what have you read recently that if you were still in publishing, you would be like, I have to, either by the hook or the crook, publish this piece of work?
There are quite often writers I come across, and I think, that's somebody I would have published if I was still in publishing. And it's not that there's any one particular work. I mean, for example, a writer called Percival Everett. I would love to have published him. There are many writers. There are writers I'd like to have published for different reasons. Somebody I still know, she's now in her 90s, and she's just published her memoir. It's called Scatterings of a Troublemaker.
Ooh, I like that.
And she is somebody, in fact, I mentioned her in something I wrote the other day. She interviewed me for Ebony magazine back in the 70s, early 70s, probably the same time that photograph was taken. And I think it's so inspirational. She's written a book and published her memoir when she's over 90. So I would certainly publish. In fact, when I was a publisher, the oldest, everybody thinks first novelists have to be in their 20s. Well, the oldest first novelist I published was in their 80s. Was in her 80s. So I think I'm inspired by people who do things which are different from what you think they're meant to do, different from the norm. I'm just, you can see when somebody's doing something, writing something that is just different from the conventional. And those are the sorts of people I would be publishing, I would want to publish. I mean, they might not want me to publish them, but hey.
Well, I think we could all want to publish a book called Scatterings of a Troublemaker by somebody in their 90s. I think that would be fantastic. Thank you.
What's the lady's name?
Sorry.
Scattered Memories of a Troublemaker. She's called Dylan Riley Dalton.
Great.
Dylyn. Riley, R-I-L-E-Y, Dalton, D-A-L-T-O-N. And she sent me a lovely photograph that was taken when she interviewed me for Ebony, of me, her, and Aretha Franklin.
Well, well, nobody can top that. So just say thank you to Margaret. It's been a pleasure to sit up here with you, and I'm sure everyone's loved listening to you. The book is available at the back here, and we've got a special price. Hold on, what was it? It should be £22, but it's £17, and Margaret will probably sign it for you. So
Then you can put it on eBay.
yeah. But I'm sure you can join me in thanking Margaret. It's been a
Thank
pleasure.
you.
The Observer.